It just happened last weekend, and I still can't believe any of it is real. My friends had been trying to set me up on a blind date for like 3 months straight. Every single time we hung out, they'd bring it up, and every single time I'd say no. Because honestly, blind dates just seemed awkward and forced to me. But my buddy Marcus wouldn't let it go. He kept insisting he knew this girl who would be perfect for me. That we had everything in common. That I was being an idiot for not giving it a shot. Finally, I just said yes to shut him up. I didn't think he was actually serious, though. I figured he'd forget about it by the next day. Then on Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, saying the date was set for Sunday at 3. He sent me the address of some coffee shop by the lake in Denver. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. I texted back asking if this was another one of his pranks because they'd pulled stuff like this before. Once they signed me up for a speed dating thing without telling me, and I had to sit through 20 conversations about cats and CrossFit. Marcus swore up and down it was real this time. He said her name was Sophie, and that she was expecting me. I told him fine, but if this turned out to be a joke, he owed me beer for a month. Saturday came and went, and I kept waiting for him to text and say he was kidding. But nothing came. Sunday morning, I woke up thinking there was no way I was actually going to go through with this. I spent most of the morning working in my garage. I'm a mechanic, and I've been restoring this old Chevy pickup for the past year. And I got so focused on replacing the brake lines that I completely forgot about the whole date thing until my alarm went off at 2:30, reminding me I had somewhere to be. I stood there, covered in grease, staring at my phone, debating whether to just ignore it. Then I thought about how Marcus would never let me hear the end of it if I bailed. So I cleaned up, changed into jeans and a clean shirt, and drove to the coffee shop expecting to walk into some elaborate prank. The place was called Lakeview Coffee, and it sat right on the water with big windows and wooden tables. It was busy for a Sunday afternoon, families and couples everywhere. I ordered a black coffee and found a table by the window where I could watch the door. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Marcus to text, and admit this was all a setup. 3 o'clock came and went. No text, no call. I was about to leave when the door opened and she walked in. I'm not even exaggerating when I say everything around me just stopped. She had long dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she was wearing this flowy sundress that was light blue with little white flowers on it. She had a calm confidence about her, like she was completely comfortable in her own skin. She looked around the coffee shop, and when her eyes landed on me, she smiled. Not a big dramatic smile, but this soft, genuine one that made my chest feel tight. She walked straight over to my table, and I stood up so fast I almost knocked my coffee over. She said, "Are you Jake?" And I nodded like an idiot. She laughed and said, "I'm Sophie, and I'm guessing we're both victims of the same setup." Yet her voice was warm and had this slight rasp to it that I immediately liked. I finally found my words and said, "Looks like our friends are in on this together." She sat down across from me, and suddenly I forgot every reason I thought blind dates were a bad idea. We started talking, and it didn't feel forced at all. She told me her friend Rachel had been bugging her to go on this date for weeks. She thought it was a joke too until Rachel sent her my picture and the coffee shop address. I asked what she did for work, and she said she was a veterinary technician at a clinic on the south side of Denver. Her whole face lit up when she talked about the animals she worked with. I told her I was a mechanic and worked at a shop downtown. But mostly, I spent my free time restoring old cars. Well, she leaned forward and asked what I was working on right now. I told her about the Chevy, and she actually seemed interested. She asked real questions about the engine and the paint color I was going to use. Most people's eyes glaze over when I talk about cars. but she was genuinely curious. We talked for over an hour without even realizing it. She told me she grew up in a small town in Wyoming and moved to Denver for school. She had a dog named Copper, who was a golden retriever mix and apparently very spoiled. I told her I'd always wanted a dog, but my apartment didn't allow pets. She said that was a crime, and anyone who worked with their hands all day deserved to come home to a dog. The way she said it made me smile, like she already understood something about me without me having to explain it. We ordered more coffee and kept talking. Well, she asked about my family, and I told her about my mom, who still lived in my hometown and called me every Sunday without fail. She told me about her parents who ran a ranch back in Wyoming and how she missed it sometimes, but loved the city too much to move back. At some point, I noticed the sun was starting to set outside, and the coffee shop was getting quieter. I checked my phone and realized we'd been sitting there for almost 3 hours. She noticed too, and her eyes went wide. She said she couldn't believe how fast the time went. I said me neither, and I meant it. We walked outside together, and the air was cooling down. Her car was parked a few spots down from mine. We stood there in that awkward moment where neither of us wanted to say goodbye, but we didn't know what else to do. And she broke the silence first and said she had a really good time. I said I did too and asked if she wanted to do it again sometime. She smiled and said she'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and she gave me a quick hug before getting in her car. I watched her drive away and stood there in the parking lot trying to process what just happened. I got in my truck and immediately called Marcus. He picked up laughing and asked how it went. I told him I owed him way more than a month of beer. That night I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she laughed. The way she listened like what I was saying actually mattered. The way she looked at me across that table. I kept replaying every moment of the conversation in my head. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Sophie saying thanks for the coffee and that she meant what she said about doing it again. I texted back right away, saying I was free next weekend if she was. She said she was, and asked if I liked hiking. I said I did, even though I hadn't been in years. She sent me the name of a trail and said to meet her there Saturday morning at 9. I said I'd be there. The whole week dragged by. Work felt longer than usual. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. We texted back and forth a few times. Nothing heavy. Just little things about our days. She sent me a picture of a puppy that came into the clinic, and I sent her a picture of the progress I made on the Chevy. It felt easy and natural, like we'd known each other way longer than we actually had. Saturday morning came, and I woke up earlier than I needed to. Yet I changed clothes 3 times, trying not to look like I was trying too hard. I got to the trailhead 15 minutes early, and she was already there, leaning against her car, wearing hiking boots and a backpack. When she saw me, she waved, and I felt that same tightness in my chest from the coffee shop. We started up the trail and fell into step beside each other. The morning was cool and quiet, except for birds and the sound of our boots on the dirt path. She told me she came here a lot to clear her head, that there was something about being in the mountains that made everything else feel smaller. I understood exactly what she meant. We hiked for about an hour before stopping at a lookout point. The view stretched out for miles, mountains and trees and the city far in the distance. We sat on a rock and shared the water she brought. She asked me why I liked working on cars, and I told her the truth, that I liked taking something broken and making it whole again, that there was something satisfying about using my hands to create something that would last. She looked at me for a long moment and said that made sense, that she could tell I was the kind of person who fixed things. I asked what she meant, and she said some people just had that energy, the kind that made you feel like everything would be okay. I didn't know what to say to that. so I just looked out at the view and tried not to let her see how much her words affected me. We hiked back down the trail, and by the time we reached the parking lot, it was almost noon. My legs were tired, but in a good way. Sophie suggested we grab lunch at this diner she knew nearby. I said yes immediately, because I wasn't ready for the day to end yet. The diner was one of those classic places with red booths and checkered floors. We slid into a corner booth and ordered burgers and fries. The waitress brought us waters, and Sophie told me this was her favorite spot when she first moved to Denver. She said she used to come here alone on weekends when she felt homesick. I asked if she still got homesick, and she nodded. She said sometimes she missed the wide-open spaces of Wyoming. The quiet, the way you could see every star at night. But then she'd remember why she left, and how she wanted to build her own life and not just follow the path everyone expected her to take. I understood that more than I could explain. I told her I grew up in a small town too, and everyone assumed I'd take over my dad's construction business. But I wanted to work with cars, not houses. My dad didn't get it at first, but eventually he came around. Sophie smiled and said it takes courage to choose your own path even when people don't understand. Our food came, and we ate and talked about everything. Favorite movies, worst first date stories, places we wanted to travel. She said she'd always wanted to see the coast, drive up Highway 1 in California, and camp on the beaches. I told her I'd never been either, but it sounded amazing. Oh, she got quiet for a second, then asked if I thought our friends planned this whole thing because they knew we'd actually like each other, or if they just got lucky. I laughed and said probably a little of both. She said either way, she was glad they did it, that she almost didn't show up to the coffee shop because she thought it would be awkward. I admitted I almost didn't show up either. We sat there looking at each other, and I felt this pull, like something was shifting between us, something real. After lunch, we walked around downtown for a bit, just wandering with no real destination. We stopped at a bookstore, and she showed me her favorite section: poetry and nature writing. I'd never been much of a reader, but the way she talked about books made me want to be. We ended up on a bench in a small park watching people walk by. Families with kids, couples holding hands, dogs chasing frisbees. Sophie leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the sun hit her face. She looked so peaceful. I wanted to reach over and hold her hand, but I didn't want to rush anything. She opened her eyes and caught me staring. She smiled and asked what I was thinking. I told her the truth, that I was thinking about how I was supposed to hate blind dates, but this didn't feel like one. She said it didn't feel like one to her either. It felt like meeting someone you were supposed to meet. We sat there a while longer, then she said she should probably get going. She had an early shift at the clinic the next morning. I walked her back to her car, and we stood there again in that same space where neither of us wanted to say goodbye. And this time she stepped closer and gave me a hug that lasted longer than the first one. I could smell her shampoo, something like coconut and vanilla. When she pulled back, she looked up at me, and for a second I thought about kissing her. But something stopped me. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe I just wanted to do this right. She squeezed my hand and said, "Text me later." I promised I would. I drove home feeling like I was floating. My apartment felt emptier than usual. I texted her when I got home saying I had an amazing day. She texted back right away, saying she did too, and that we should do it again soon. I said, "How about next weekend?" and she sent back a smiley face. The next few weeks were a blur of texts and calls and more dates. We went to a farmer's market and she bought flowers for her apartment. We saw a movie and shared popcorn in the back row. We cooked dinner at her place, and her dog Copper decided I was his new best friend. Every time I saw her, it felt easier. More natural, like we were building something without even trying. One night, she invited me over and said she wanted to show me something. When I got there, she led me out to her tiny balcony. She had string lights hung up and candles lit. She said she'd been wanting to do this for a while, create a little space where she could sit and relax after long days. We sat out there talking until late. She told me more about her family, about how her parents worked hard their whole lives and taught her the value of showing up even when things got tough. I told her about my dad and how he passed away 2 years ago.